What we're going to do today is we're going to glance at this private wall assignment that you guys may or may not have seen, and we're just going to model it in a regular SQL database. All right, so I've got it open here. Let's take a quick look at what we're doing. And a user's wall is a list of their private messages. So once a user is logged in, they can view their wall, and on this same page, the logged in user can also send messages to other users. So in our schema, if we're building a schema for this project, what would you think the different tables that we need are, just by looking at it? Users and messages. Yeah, there's really nothing else to it. It's just users and messages. So let's start creating this thing, and you can see that each user has a first, a last, an email, and a password, the regular, the usual suspects. And then our messages is just simply a string, and probably it'll have created at and updated at. So let's go into our MySQL workbench here, and then we want to create a new model. So add a diagram, and in here let's just create our users. So we'll say this is users, and then of course we got the usual stuff. So we got ID. This will be auto incremented, first name, 255 maybe. Whoa. Okay. I don't know why I'm not seeing the actual diagram on screen. Have you guys had this issue with SQL Workbench?
Yeah, I just restarted.
I tried restarting Workbench and it's still. Anyway, I'm gonna do it, but it is kind of not so great. Okay, so 255 on email, then we'll have password again, 255, and then we want to have always the created at and updated at, date, time, and then on updated at, I'll just set that to now, date, time, now. Cool, let me close this out. Now that looks a little better. I don't know why it's doing that to me, but so the next thing we need to do is we have to create a messages table as well. So let's do that. Call this messages, message. So the convention that we're using is that for the tables, as you can see, we're always doing lowercase and then making them plural. All right? So I need to have an ID on this guy. Same thing, auto increment it, and then I'm just going to have a field called content, and that's just going to be text. So we're not going to limit that in any way. Then the other thing we're going to have our usual created at, okay, updated at, date, time. Okay, and then that one will be now. Cool. All right, so now what we want to do is actually create some relationships here. So a message will have a couple different users associated with it. What users are we going to have for a message? Yeah, like a sender and receiver. Exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to establish a couple different relationships. Let's ask ourselves here, what are the relationships? So which one? We have a one-to-many, right? Which is the one and which is the many? Very good. Yeah, exactly. So if you sometimes if you talk it out in your head, it will make even more sense. So if we say a user can write or can send many messages, or a user can receive many messages, but we wouldn't say that a message can have many senders. Right? That wouldn't make any sense. Or a message can have many receivers. No, it's only directed at one person. So let's start creating some of these relationships. So when we do the one-to-many, we actually start at the many table, and then we track back to the one table. Okay? So instead of user's ID, I'm going to change this to be sender ID. Okay? And it will always, when you make those connections in SQL Workbench, it will always say user's ID like that, or whatever the plural name of the table was. So you'll need to change that to, because we want our foreign keys to be singular to reflect that it only belongs to one user. Yes, question?
Does that mean that you have to change your users table to say senders?
No, I'm not following you on that.
I always thought that when you change the plural to singular, it's reflecting what the plural name was. You're changing it to a singular value or form. So now that you've changed what was supposed to be, it was users underscore ID, and usually we change that to user underscore ID. And so now you've changed it to sender underscore ID. Do we have to reflect?
So then I think your question is sort of, well, has something changed in the users table? Is that what you're asking? Is it now user? No. No. But we'll see when we do queries how we can actually reference it in a way that makes sense. So yeah, just kind of go with it for now. Don't worry too much about it. But when we do the query, I think it'll make a little more sense. So let's do the same thing. So we have a sender ID. Let's also create a receiver ID. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll just change this. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Okay, sorry about that. Receiver ID. Okay, so let me close that out. So this is good. Now we have both a sender and a receiver ID, which is going to allow us to actually figure out who sent this or who was meant to receive it. All right. Now let's actually create this. We want to create this actual schema. So we need to do, I'm going to change the name of the schema over here. We'll call it private wall. And then I need to forward engineer it. So I'll go up to my database here, forward engineer, go through all these little prompts. And again, this is the query that it's actually running in SQL for us. So it's creating this table if it doesn't exist, and this table if it doesn't exist. Excellent. You can see where these foreign keys are down in here. I know that's kind of small, but can't be avoided. Alright, so we successfully engineered that. I'm going to close this out here, and maybe this out here. Hopefully. Okay, cool. So I didn't lose my window this time. I'm very happy about that. Let's refresh this and see if our schema is there. Here it is, private wall. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create some users, and then we'll create some messages in between them so that we can actually run kind of a query and see how can we show it so that we see exactly who the sender is, something like that. All right. So let's use private wall. Lightning bolt that guy. All right. Now let's insert some users. So say insert into users. And we got columns, so first name, last name, email, password. And then we'll say created at, because that's the one we do need to enter. Values. All right, who's my first user? Who wants to volunteer? Anyone? Yes, Alish. I don't think I've had you in my examples yet, so this is good. Do me a favor and tell me your last name. D-A-H-A-L. Okay, cool. All right, and you are Alish at dahal.com. Password is password. So again, this would be hashed in normal circumstances. I'm not going to do anything with that right now. And then we want the created at to be now, so we're good there. And then I'm just going to add a select all query after this so that we continue to see what our users are. Whoops. Select all from users, that's a keyword. All right, let's run this. Uh-oh. Insert it. Oh, you're absolutely right. Good catch, guys. Boom, you guys are hired. All right. Next user. Who wants to go next? Tom? Hey, Tom. All right, I appreciate it. Tom.
Just do app.
Oh, come on. I like to challenge myself. Is that right?
That is correct.
That's correct. All right. With the last name McNamara?
No, we had a Secretary of State
Secretary of
who
State.
was responsible for the continuation
I was
of Vietnam War. So we're
There you
not
go.
popular.
All right, all right.
I didn't even know Secretary of State.
All right, guys, third user. Let's not get too far off track. Who's our third user? Bob Smith. Man, I just can't resist. All right, Bob Smith. It's just so awesome having a Bob Smith in the cohort. All right, let's do this. Excellent. We got 3 users, so let's start creating some messages between them. So we'll change this. And then actually, we'll change our little query down here so we're seeing what these messages are after we create them. Okay, so we're going to insert into messages. Our columns are just content, and then I think we had created at, and then we have sender ID, and then receiver ID. Okay, and then we'll say values. So the first one, I don't know, maybe we'll make all the messages say the same thing. Hey there. What'd you say? Hi, Tom? Hi, Tom. Sup? Yeah. Sup, Tom? All right. Created at, it's just going to be now. And then our sender ID, let's say the first one goes from 1 to 2. So the receiver ID was 2 on that. Let's add the semicolon there. Add some messages. There's a message. Cool. Let's do another one that goes from 2 to 3. Okay. All right. Now, they're all saying the same thing. Hey there. Now we're going to go from 1 to 3. All right. Maybe we could do 3 to 1 just to have some fun. And then 3 to 2. Okay. Cool. So now we have some messages. So now the question is, let's say I'm a user and I'm logging into my private wall. So I'm there. How do I find the messages that have been sent to me along with the other user that has sent those messages? Because I don't just want the message. I want to know who sent it, right? So I can display that on my page. Yeah, we're going to have to do a join, right? What? Jesus Christ. A little bit of a strong reaction there. All right. Okay, so let's say we're trying to find out which messages, let's say I'm user number 3, and I want to find out who has sent messages to me. So let's do some stuff, right? Let's select messages, and then, whoops. Actually, let's just go select all, but we'll change this in a second. So we'll say select all from messages, and now we're going to have to join. Okay? So we're going to join users, and I'm going to alias this. Have you guys seen aliasing? Yeah. So the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want to be confused about what user means. Okay? Normally it's just a user, but here I'm trying to find out who is the sender of the message. So users as sender. Yeah, let's do it as sender. Probably that makes more sense because we only have one sender, right? So join users as sender, and then we're going to do it on sender dot ID equals messages dot sender ID. Okay, and so what I'm going to actually start picking out the pieces that I'm interested in. So what am I interested in for messages? Yeah, probably the content, maybe the ID, because I think in the assignment here there's an option to delete messages here. So we do need to know what the ID of the message was. So let's just pull that out. So we'll say messages.id.
You need a sender ID, right?
Well, we're going to get, yeah, actually, maybe that's a good point. Messages.id. Although, is that really important? Because if we need to delete the message, do we need to know the sender's ID?
For the name.
We need his name. Someone wrote on the
Well, right, but we're going to get his name as first and last. We don't really need his ID, right? Yeah. Okay, so messages.id, messages.content. And then the things that I want from sender are going to be, let's say the sender first name, right? And then sender dot last name. Anything else?
Do we also want the time difference between now and when the message was created?
You want me to start trying to do sensei bonuses? Is that a sensei bonus? It probably is, right? Hey man, you're trying to get me to do your work for you. What the heck? All right, so here we go. Whoops. We didn't actually specify a where condition, so that's why we got everything, right? So let's change it. We were only interested in where the receiver ID was 3. So let's say where messages dot receiver ID equals 3. Let's run that. Cool. So we just got the messages that were received by user 3. Let's change this, see what happens when we go user 1. Whoops. Okay. And then Bob Smith just sent one message to user 1. So we're pretty good. Let's see what happens when we go user 2. All right. So we got a couple messages that went to user 2. Any questions about how this query worked, or like as far as the aliasing, does this kind of make sense to you guys?
Yeah. Would it work without the alias though?
Yeah. Yeah, so if I didn't alias it, let's do that just to kind of show. So instead of users as sender, we'll just change this up here. So we'll say users. Uh-oh. Oh, we were still referencing sender.id, which is down here. So this needs to become users. Okay. Okay, so yeah, same exact thing.
But when you say when you need to join the users
Mhm.
twice, would it work without alias though?
Oh, you might run into a conflict in that case. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I would, and in that case, I would strongly recommend aliasing because you really want to keep it distinct. Which one's the sender and which one's the receiver?
Could you,
Yeah.
if you did joined again
Mhm.
without
Without aliasing?
yeah, could you even call a variable, or would it just take the first one that it found?
I presume it would probably be the first one. Yeah. And that's a great thing for you guys to test on your own because I don't want to take a bunch of extra time doing it. But it is kind of a curiosity. Really only a curiosity though, because as far as the readability of your code, if you try to do that without aliasing, like what does users mean at that point? Is it the sender or the receiver? It's not very clear. But with aliasing, we can make that very clear. So I think that's much preferable, in my personal opinion. All right. So other than that, are we pretty good on the query that we wrote here? Make sense to you guys? A join. I know it's like kind of early in the morning to be joining tables, but nevertheless. All right, so the next part of this discussion this morning is we're actually going to see a different way to do things because, as I mentioned earlier, Django has what's called an ORM. This is an object relational mapper. And let's talk very briefly about what that means. It just means that all of this SQL that we've been learning here, we won't have to write our queries using raw SQL. We'll be able to use the mappers that are built into Django to actually query for us and getting and creating data quite easy. You guys will probably like it. So let's get a new project going. So let's go here. I'll hopefully make this big enough for you guys to see. Whoa. Holy moly. All right. Let's get my terminal window open here. Okay, so go to Dojo, Stacks, Python, Lectures. All right. And then, so in order to create a new Django project, what do we need to do again? Yeah, we have to activate the environment. That's correct. So I'm going to go up. Actually, I think it's only one level. To my environments, I've got a Django environment bin activate. And inside my Django environment, I have access to that Django CLI, which will enable me to create a new project. So we'll say Django admin start project. And then the name of this project, we'll just call it ORM practice. Oops. Okay. And then I'm going to code against this guy. Actually, wait. Before I do that, let's just go into it. So we'll go inside ORM practice. And then I will open that folder. Where is it? ORM practice. Ah, darn it. It opened a new window. I knew that was going to happen. Okay, so let me see if I can close this old one here. Oh, maybe I don't need to. Okay, cool. The thing is, I lost my terminal window, so I'm kind of bummed about that. Because in order for us to do things in Django, again, we need to have our environment activated, right? So let's just go through this again, up a couple levels, environments, Django, then activate. Ooh, I can't spell all of a sudden. Activate. Okay, cool. So we got our environment activated. Let's show our folder structure so we know what's going on here. We want to actually create a new app, right? So how do we do that? We're going to create a apps folder. So make dir apps. Okay, and then we want to go inside of that apps folder so that we can create our main app. And we'll just say Python up one level manage.py, and then we'll go, whoops, start app main. Okay, so that should have created a main app for us. We have our main in here. The other thing we need to do always is we have to add the app that we're using to our settings. So I'll close this out real quick. Okay, and again, make sure that you have a comma in here. If you do not, I've heard that this is a real beast to debug. So if you do not put a comma in this list, you could spend a ton of time debugging it. So don't do that. Don't not do that.
Basically,
Double negative for you guys.
basically the steps that you're going through, what you showed us yesterday, is on that cheat sheet.
On the cheat sheet, yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of a review, but since only a few of you are in Django right now, it'll be like, you haven't done this yet.
This really helps.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's that. Now let's look at some other files that we have in here that we haven't yet seen. So underneath my main app, it also created this file called models.py, all right, which right now is actually empty. And this is where we're going to be doing all of our database stuff in Django. So when we want to create our tables, we are going to first create our models. So we have to have the models, and then we're going to go through this process called migrating those models into our actual database. All right. So this is the way that we're going to do it. We're just going to say a class of user, and then that takes in models.model. Okay. So what does that look like? If you guys see that, what is happening here? Obviously, we've created a class, And what about what we passed into that class? What does that mean? You guys remember? Anyone? I know one of you knows the answer to this. Not letting you off the hook. No? Not looking for that one. Any other ideas? When we pass in models.model, what does that mean that we're doing? No, that's an interesting idea, but no, we're not actually, this is not a method, right? We're actually creating a class. Okay, so when we pass in something else, we are now inheriting from that class, remember? Okay, so we're inheriting from the models class. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to just set up these fields that we have. So obviously we've got first name, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to say models.carField max. I believe this is syntax. Let me pull it up in the platform just so I'm not deceiving you guys. Oh gosh. Does anyone else hate how you always have to go back to the tracks?
Yeah.
That drives me nuts. Django 3 and C. What is called? Oh no, Python 3. Whoops. Alright, Python 3 and C. Okay, so in Django, let's get to the proper section here. ORM models. Okay, so this is where we're at. We are calling the car field against models, or coming from models, and we're setting a max length for these individual fields. So let's go back in here. We're just going to say the max length equals 255, and this is actually establishing a boundary inside of our database, just like when we did it inside SQL Workbench. Yeah, like when we did varchar 255, same kind of thing. All right. Another key about these models is that you do not want to put a comma in between these different things. That will cause you an error as well. Last name. Actually, let me just copy this down because it's going to be the same. All right, so we'll say that is last name, and then this is email, password. Okay. Cool. And then we've got created at and updated at as usual. So on these guys, we want to use a date time field. And I'm going to try to do this right by memory, but I may mess something up. So on created at, we want to have the date added when we're creating. So we'll say auto now add equals true. And then for updated at, we'll do something quite similar, but not exactly the same. We'll just say auto now equals true. So this will establish that regardless of whether we're creating or updating the record, we will automatically set that updated at. All right. Now let's go back to the platform, make sure this is right. Yeah, so we have date time field, auto now add equals true, auto now on updated at. Okay, cool. So now the second part of the process with this is that in order to actually have this stuff be in our database, as I said, we have to migrate it. So the Django CLI, or the Django gods, what have you, they have created the ability for us to do migrations, and I'll show you guys how to do that. We're going to do Python. Actually, hold on, let me get out of my apps. So now I'm in the root of my project, and then we'll say Python manage.py. So again, that was that file in the root that allows us to do some of this functionality. And then we're going to say make migrations. Okay, so you can see there it actually created a model user for us, which is pretty nice. Let's check over here in the files and see what that looks like. If you open up the migrations folder, we should see something. Oops. Yeah, so here we've got 0001, and let me try to, whoops, I don't want to trash this terminal, hold on. Okay, so let me just close that so that we can actually see what's going on. So it generated this class called migration, and then inside there you can see where all of the different fields are going to be created when we actually run the migration. So it hasn't yet been done in the database, we just created the file that's going to allow us to do it. Okay? Any questions about this or what we've done so far?
So this just happened just because of we use the command or function that migration, so it just created itself.
Correct, yeah. So we use the built-in functionality of Django to build this migrations file. So just by running Python manage.py and then make migrations, it knows to create this file if there are any changes to our database. So if our models were exactly the same as they were before, there would be nothing to migrate. Does that make sense? It's only going to be able to do a migration if we've made some change to our model, okay, or one of our other models. All right, good. So let's open up the terminal again. The second part of the process is we actually need to run the migration. So we'll do the same similar thing. We're going to do Python manage.py, and then we're just going to say migrate. Okay, cool. So now we have all of this stuff went okay. We don't have any errors in there. If you do get any errors when you run your migration, there's a chance you might have to make some changes to your model. Like in some case, I've seen people run into errors where a column or a field did not have a default value or something like that. So when they tried to migrate it, because there was no default value, SQL didn't like that so much. All right, so that's a possibility.
So in that case, like, it'll tell you like particular, for example, you know how there's okay.
Yeah.
But if there is an error in one thing, everything would be like say error, or just that one particular thing would be not.
Yeah, it should give you a pretty descriptive error of what was happening. It'll say something like you don't have a default value for this particular column, and therefore Django doesn't know what to put in that column when it runs the migration. Okay, because sometimes fields cannot be null; they're not nullable fields, which means that there has to be something in that field. So that's where you might come across that. Okay. So we're not actually going to run this project as a whole front-end thing in the browser right now. What we're going to do is we're just going to test out how we can interact with it inside this thing called the Django shell. Okay. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to show you guys another tool that you may or may not want to install. Totally up to you. It's called DB Browser for SQLite. Okay, and I believe there's a link to this somewhere in the schedule. Oh, it's not actually a link, so I'll turn it into a link so that if you guys want to download this thing, you can grab it. But what this tool allows us to do is it allows us to interact with our Django databases in the same way that we're able to do with MySQL Workbench. So Django is not by default using MySQL. By default, it's using this thing called SQLite, which is essentially putting all of your data into a single file. Whereas with our database, the rest of our computer can interact with it because we sort of have a MySQL server on our computer. Here, we will have a file inside of our project that keeps track of all the data. So if I look at the project folders again, let's see what we have. So inside that, let me refresh this. So inside of our app, see how we have this db.sqlite3 file? This is the file that's actually holding all of our data for this particular project. And okay, so we can't even open it here in VS Code. But by default, Django is going to use SQLite to store its data in a more robust application or something that you were going to deploy, you can also use a different database. You could use an actual MySQL, or you could use something like Postgres as your database instead.
But if you want to use those databases, will you still be able to use ORM?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, you can. Trying to see where the settings for that was. Have any of you come across this? Is it inside settings? No. There's a spot where you can actually change what the database that you're using in here, and I'll locate that and shoot it to you guys on Mattermost just so you know what it is. But for now, let's just go ahead and open up our actual project that we just made. Okay, so inside Python, not in assignments, but inside of our lectures, we've got ORM practice, and I want to open up the db.sqlite 3. So if I open that file, I can actually run some queries. So I could do something like select all from, hold on one second, let's look at the database structure. So here you can see we have all of these other databases that were created, or all these other tables, sorry, that were created. So we've got some admin stuff, some auth tables, and so forth. The one that we just created is down here. So it's going to be the name of your app underscore the name of that individual table. So we have main underscore user. So there we go. And you can see all the fields that we created on that. So if I want to run a query on this, I should be able to go to execute SQL, and then I'll say from main user. And then you can run it with this little play button up in here. Okay, we return 0 rows because we actually don't have anything in there yet. So let's create some stuff over here. To get to the Python shell, or the Django shell as we were talking about, we're going to do this. We're going to say python manage.py, and then we're going to say shell. Okay, so that gives us a nice shell. Now what we want to do is we want to import our model, our user model, to be in order to be able to do some things with it. So let's say from apps.main.models, let's import user. Cool. All right. So before we're going to practice like actually getting some users out, let's create a couple just so we have some users to go on. So let's say user, and you guys will get used to the syntax, so don't be alarmed. We're going to say user.objects.create. Okay, and now I need to actually establish the fields that we're entering here. So we got first name equals Joel, you're in there. Last name Zorbu. Email joel@z.com. Password is going to be password. Cool. And there we go. We actually got back a user object. So that's nice. So we got somebody in our database. Let's see if we can see it over here. If I run this query again, hey, there he is. Joel's in there. So this is like, again, DB Browser for SQLite is going to give us a very nice way of looking at our data. The shell won't be maybe as user-friendly in the way that it looks. Okay, so let's enter in one more. Shant, you're up, man. So let's go. I'm going to see if I can spell your last name right. I think I can do it. Let's see what I got here. I got A-T-T-A-R-E-A. Right? All right, cool. We're in. Shant. Oops. At a.com. Cool. Okay, so we should have 2 users in there, and if I go back here, indeed we do. So let's work on actually pulling these from the terminal, and these are the actual methods that you guys are going to be able to use in your real applications. So what we're doing in the terminal is not going to be useless. It will actually be something you'll use when you're building your apps. Okay? So to get all of our users, what I can do is I can say user.objects.all, and then this is a method. And then the other thing that I might do is, oh shoot, well let's just get it for now. Okay, so we get these two user objects, right? Not very friendly. So let's try something else. Let's say dot values. Okay, and that actually would give me the values of that query that I just ran. So it's a little bit nicer. Still not as nice as DB browser for SQLite. So there's that. But let's say I want to get a specific user. What I can do is I can say user.objects.get, and then we're going to do ID equals 1. So that should be Joel. And let's do values again. Whoops, I don't have that. Okay, so let's just set it to a variable. Say user, or I'm going to say Joel equals user.objects dot get, and again we'll say ID equals 1. Okay, so now let's just print out Joel's first name. So if I go, or actually we'll do his last name, Joel.lastname. Okay, that will return us that specific field that we're interested in. Okay, we also have some other methods that we can use for getting. We can do something like user.objects.last. What do you think that would return us? The last person that's been entered, exactly. So let's, yeah, Shant. We'll just call this last, run that guy, and then we'll say last.firstname, Shant, okay? Last.lastname, there's his last name, cool. So that's another thing we could do. We can also use something called filtering, which means that we will filter our list of users to only match a specific condition. So let's say we only want to get users with the first name Shant. Okay. So let's say user.objects.filter, and then we'll say first name equals Shant. And then we'll do dot value so we can actually see what it is. Okay, so indeed we only got Shant, but what type of data structure is this? This is a list. Exactly. So this is sort of an important distinction. When we use the get method, we're only going to get back a single well, we could potentially not get one back at all if we search for something that was not there. Whereas if we use filter, we will get back a list. So similar to how we were doing with Flask and MySQL, when we did a get in Flask MySQL, we got back a list every time. In this case, we're only going to get back a list when we run a filter query. If we do a get query, we would just get a single one or nothing at all. Okay? So it makes it a little bit easier just in terms of if you're trying to get a single user and you know that user's ID, it'd be preferable to just get back one user. We don't really need to get a list and then say, oh, the user I want is, the list at position 0, something like that. Right? There are some other things that you can do with this. So inside the Django shell, you guys can kind of go through this on your own. Oops. Trying to see where they are. Okay, so here they are. So we've got first, last. We actually didn't do first, but same thing. So if I go first equals user.objects.first, again, that's going to give me Shant. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, it would. My bad. So there it is. Yeah, so Joel's last name because he was the first one that we entered in there. All right. So we have first, last. There's get, which we did. There's all, filter, exclude. What do you think exclude is going to do?
Anything but.
Yeah, exactly. Anything but. It's like a reverse filter. So if we exclude Shant, for instance. Sorry, don't feel bad. All right, user.objects.exclude. And then we'll say first name equals Shant. And then we'll do values again so that we can see what they are. So all we got was Joel. All right. That's it. That's the Django ORM. Anybody have any questions about what we did? Yes, Justin.
How do you do schemas in MySQLite? Or is it like, I'm sorry, not schemas.
Table.
Yeah, the diagram.
You would have to do it somewhere else. You could still do it in Workbench. It's just that if you were going to use SQLite, we wouldn't run the migration because then that would create it in your MySQL server. Unless you actually changed your DB and the project to use MySQL, which you could do.
Is there an advantage to using SQLite, or like since we already know SQL, should we just figure out how to use SQL?
Well, the advantage is that it's very lightweight and it just holds all of your data in a single file. So it's very good when we're creating these small projects that we're doing just as we go through the platform. However, like I said, if you were if you were deploying a larger project of some sort, you probably wouldn't want to use SQLite for that.
So whenever you make a file in your models and then do like class, I'm assuming like we're creating a table, right? But like what database does this table belong to?
It belongs to the SQLite database that is created when we run our migration, but it's just created within that specific project.
So that database belongs to the project or the app?
To the project.
So like the outer.
Because remember the project can have multiple apps in it. You know, like we're not really doing that right now. We're just sort of creating one main app inside, but we could have a project that had multiple apps in it. Like maybe it might have an admin app, it might have a front end app, something like that.
Would each of those apps get their own database file, or would they all call them the same?
No, they wouldn't get their own database. They would actually get a table in it. So as you can see, our SQL or our db.sqlite file is in the root directory of the project. And then if we look at over here, if we explore the database structure, note how this main user table was right in there with all those other apps. So we had by default an auth app. There was also a Django admin app. So they're all put underneath the same database, but they do have their own distinct tables.
And then to create relationships between them, like if you had two tables, you could do that from this, or
We're gonna do it from our models file, but we're not gonna do it today. Yeah, so we will be creating, like if we had, for instance, with that private wall, see how we have user here? Underneath there, we would create a class for message. Yeah.
Does that mean the session is also on database now? So like we don't have to use cookies anymore?
What do you mean? Oh, the
Because
session
I see
isn't.
a session like table.
I didn't even notice that. Oh yeah, Django session. Yes, that is probably where they're dropping session in. Correct. Nice observation. I didn't even notice that. Yeah. Good call.
So without the database, where is the session being stored? Just in the cookies
Yeah, I believe Flask was doing that, and that's why I posted up something on Mattermost last week about why you wouldn't want to store anything sensitive in the session. So we don't want to store passwords or anything like that we wouldn't want an outsider to see. So normal, like in typical situations, the session information is going to be stored on the server so they can't can't be tampered with. There is a cookie that references a specific session, and then the server can determine, okay, does this person have access to this session? Yeah, he does. So I can access all the session data for that user. Good question. Any other questions before you guys get cracking? Yeah.
When we hash passwords,
Mhm.
encrypt is a flash thing. I think we're gonna have
Flask. Yeah, exactly. So we'll actually import a different version for Django. Yep. Good. All right. Class dismissed. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this for the group?
Off topic question, kind of. Who puts out these frameworks? You know, like they're so like very